Hello everyone, it's Kevin with VintiqueSound.com, and in today's video I'm going to give you my top 15 feature requests for Cubase Pro 11. So Cubase Pro 10.5 was released approximately 1 month ago, and I am by no means dissatisfied with that release. However, I think there's quite a few features that I think would very much improve the workflow aspect of Cubase and some creativity aspects as well. So number one on my list is an extended effects chains, much like Studio One. So currently in Cubase, the only way to process using insert plugins is to have them in serial mode like this. You do have the ability to switch between pre and post faders very easily. I love that feature. But if I wanted to, say, take the signal of this track right here, split it up into two completely duplicate signals, process them in a kind of parallel compression or parallel EQ or parallel saturation type of scenario, and then bring them back into a single signal, that's currently not possible. So in Studio One, you have the ability to insert a splitter, which then gives you the ability to split the signal in 3 different ways. Firstly, you can select the number of splits you want. You can split them in exact duplicates, so they can just be parallel copies of one another. You can also split the channels. So let's say you have a stereo signal. You can split it between left and right. And I don't know the exact details, but it would also be awesome to be able to split between mid and side. That would be amazing. And lastly, you also have the ability to split between different frequency bands. And this frequency split, in effect, allows you to create your own modular, customizable, multi-band effects processor, which is very, very powerful. So currently in Cubase, you do have a routings tab, which allows you to select between the defaults. If it was a stereo track, you could have it as default stereo, or you could process it as a mono plugin. But that seems to be only true for Steinberg plugins because it's not working on this Soundtoys plugin here. And again, that does not give that same flexibility. You can't split the signals or do any fun routing. It's just a very, very broken down, simple routing selection. Imagine instead this tab was a fully featured routing system where you can split between bands and all that stuff. That would be a beautiful little sandbox environment to do some experiments with some crazy effects chains. That would be a very, very cool feature to have. Number 2 is modulators like LFOs and step sequencers and stuff like that for all parameters, kind of like what Bitwig does. So in Bitwig, for every single instrument and every single insert plugin, whether it's a native Bitwig device or a third-party plugin or third-party VST, you have the ability to add any number of modular devices to that particular unit. Now, let's say I wanted to modulate the detune on this FM8. I could go into the modular devices. For this instance, I'll just use the classic LFO, and to find this, you do need to do a little bit of work when it's a third-party plugin. Find the detune by the little search window, and when I move this, you can see it's the first top one right here. So I can edit the LFO by clicking this button. I can have it sync to BPM by going, let's say, a half time, and I can click this, click the range of detune I would like, and there you go. Now it's modulating the detune. And I can close this out and get out of this screen so that it saves screen room. You can go into an EQ plugin and you can modulate with an envelope you can modulate the cutoff frequency of an EQ with an envelope. So you can create your own envelope shapers. It's very, very intuitive and very, very powerful, and opens up so much creativity, especially during the song building process and creating ideas and interesting textures. But also in the mixing aspect, it creates a little bit more free of a way to get some interesting effects and mixdown possibilities. So if I had to give my opinion of how this should be implemented, if there needed to be a separate window of some kind, there could be another tab on the top here, perchance, or some other tab within this channel settings area. But I don't know what's exactly possible to code within Cubase itself and to get everything right as far as workflow and to maintain its current abilities. But nevertheless, that is a dream of mine to have that type of functionality in Cubase. Number 3 is some sort of clip-based functionality. And I think the way that makes the most sense is currently how Bitwig works. So you can very easily go between clip-based and timeline-based. Whenever you're playing on the timeline, if you wanted to trigger a clip, it negates, it ignores everything that's on the timeline, and it only plays whatever's being played in the clip. And when you want to go back to whatever's on the timeline, you click this button here, and it re-engages this and stops all the clip-based audio and instrument and MIDI stuff. And what's great is because it's organized in the exact horizontal timeline way, you can drag things back and forth between clip and timeline all seamlessly. And to me, that offers the most flexibility, and it seems to make the most sense intuitively. And it also seems to me to be the easiest, best way to integrate within Cubase as well. So you can open up the timeline and clip launchers separately in the top screen here. It does seem to me that that is something that is possible within Cubase. If they had some kind of a tab, just like we have with the lower zone and right zones, if we had another tab that opened up a clip-based launcher and disengaged the track whenever you're playing a clip, that would be perfect. Number 4 is something that would save me lots and lots of time, and that is the ability to freeze multiple tracks at once. So to me, this matters most towards the end of a mixing and mastering session where CPU starts to become an issue. So instead of having to go into each individual track and then click the freeze button and then select the options that you like to do, it would save lots and lots of time if I could just highlight all the tracks, click a global freeze button that then gave you a similar breakdown of options, and then have it do all this processing for, you could do this entire project, freeze the entire thing down. It could take quite a while, but then I can go do something useful, come back to a completely frozen project, and would save me from having to babysit this thing, go one by one, track by track, option by option. So yeah, that would be great. Number 5 is on a somewhat related note, which is automatic tail size detection when rendering in place and when freezing. So currently I have to select a tail size, and if I ever get this wrong, if I cut it short, it's going to cut off. Let's say I have a reverb on one of my instruments, and the reverb tail is roughly 3 seconds, and I don't know exactly where the instrument stops playing, and I randomly guess 3 seconds, but in actuality there's 2 more seconds of audio. Then it would cut off that last 2 seconds. It's not particularly an issue. I can always just jump up the tail size. But if there was a freeze multiple tracks function, then the automatic tail size would come in even more handy, because you would have many different types of tracks, so much different processing going on that having one simple check mark for automatic tail size, and Cubase does that work for you, that would be another time saver. So there's that for freezing, but also I would add for render in place, there should be an automatic tail size as well. Number 6 is more consistent abilities between the main project window and the MixConsole. So I have 3 major suggestions for this. The first one is the middle mouse wheel button. If you have a classic mouse where you have the scroll wheel, when you click down on that middle button, in the main project window, you can grab the screen and scroll around. And it doesn't matter if you're grabbing on the tracks or in the project window area. This is an extremely handy feature that all DAWs should have. So my gripe is that in the MixConsole, you cannot do that. I'm clicking the middle mouse wheel. You can only do that in this racks section. So let's say I open up the EQ. It's much longer. When I click the middle mouse wheel, it acts like it does in the main screen, but it doesn't act like that in this entire section. If I click the middle mouse wheel on this fader, it just duplicates the functionality of the left mouse button, which to me doesn't make any sense. We already have that functionality with the left mouse button, but again, you cannot scroll left and right. The only way that you can scroll left and right is by hovering this tiny little section and actually scrolling with the mouse wheel or clicking on the little bar, and that is completely unfortunate. What's more is, I know I've had this issue, is when I'm in this area and I'm trying to scroll to move left and right in the MixConsole, sometimes I accidentally change a parameter because the mouse scroll wheel actually changes parameters on the screen. So if instead I click the middle mouse wheel, this would completely eliminate that frustration as well. The second part of this consistency issue is that in this main project window area, let's go to the actual track here. So this drop track, you could see it's currently sandwiched between reverse cymbal and claps. When I'm in the main section, I can move it and it's now in front of reverse cymbals, and I have the MixConsole synced to the main project window, so it is now moved. But I don't have the ability to then move and rearrange the tracks like I do in the main screen. All it does is it copies settings from this channel to that channel. That is not what I would expect, and that's not what I would want. It would be perfectly okay to have, for instance, when you copy plugins over, you use Alt, click, drag, and drop. Why don't they have that as the copy tracks functions by having Alt, click, drag, and copy the settings? It should distinguish when you single left click on the mouse and drag these tracks. It should actually move the tracks, not copy the track settings. And the third one, which is kind of less of an issue because I have 2 monitors, but whenever I'm organizing projects, especially when I get clients' projects and I'm creating a mix session, I tend to group things very systematically. So I'll go into their tracks, click on all similar tracks, like 2 kick sample tracks, right click on it, and I want to create a group track like I've done here. In order to do that, I actually have to go into the MixConsole, find those tracks, right click, and then I can add to group channel, and then it actually creates it and it routes these channels automatically to the group that I've created. That is very, very handy, and it's a time saver, but it would be great if it was consistent with the main project area where you can also group the tracks in the same way. So my suggestion is not only for group tracks, but also for the other two, which is effects channels and VCA faders to the selected channels. To me, that would create consistency and would just improve workability, especially if you have a single screen to work with, because then you don't have to open up another window on the same screen, go back to your main screen, and et cetera, et cetera. It's just a time saver, and it adds consistency with how the program functions. Number 7 is an improved flexibility between mono, stereo, and surround tracks. So this is a long-standing feature request where we would like to have the ability to switch very easily within this exact track between mono, stereo, and any number of surround type setups. So my suggestion is both within the actual tracks themselves, but also within the render in place. So when I go to render in place and I go into the settings, there is no ability to render down to mono, render up to stereo, or any of that nature. That would be another handy feature. Number 8 is multi-track audio warping. So currently, we do have the ability to highlight several audio events. When you double click them, you're able to view those two events stacked over each other, and you can select which of the two you are going to be editing. And you do have the ability to remove showing all the events stacked upon each other by this button here. For some reason, I have a pretty serious visual glitch is when I move my audio warp tool onto this section to actually make some warp changes and whatnot. You can see the visual glitch here where the background track is just being totally mangled and I just can't even work properly in this way. Now, the suggestion is not only to fix the visual glitches, but also the ability to edit multiple stacked audio events at once. So instead of this moving the single track that I've selected, you should also have the ability to edit and free warp all the selected tracks at once. Now, it suggests that one of two ways: either it would be that they're stacked upon each other and you move them and you can time align things visually with having them stacked over each other, or it would be to have multiple lanes of different tracks where wherever you select in the timeline, you can see in a kind of horizontally represented, and they all move in the same way, but in different lanes. And I guess you could probably have an option where you can do either one of those two. That would be actually very, very powerful. Number 9 is similar to number 8, which is the ability to edit multiple MIDI and audio events in the lower zone. So currently, as you can see, when I select this MIDI event and these audio events, when I double click, I can only see the audio event currently. If I double click this, I can see the MIDI event. So it does work for multiple MIDI events. And you can see here it's stacked this event and that event on top of each other. I can then switch between whichever active event, make changes to it. I can also uncheck this edit active part only so that I can freely edit all pieces of MIDI data from all the events. So if it was possible to stack both audio and MIDI events, that would be fantastic. That would enable me the ability to go and line up MIDI events with audio recordings. That could be very handy for editing. Number 10 is going to be just clearly hypothetical situation. If it is possible to create hybrid tracks, just like Bitwig has, where you can have an instrument track, but also overlay audio events on that instrument track. To me, is definitely not a necessity at all. It just would, I think, simplify things a little bit. From an intuitive standpoint, it would just be able to stack whatever you want in that track and then not have to worry about duplicating tracks or creating or choosing correctly between audio and instrument tracks. If it just wasn't so segregated, it might just improve workability or workflow a little bit. Okay, and number 11 is something that I noticed somewhat recently is since the new version, whenever they added this sidechain drop down here, it's the fact that I would like for the actual sidechain input settings that I've created. Let's say I have a kick drum sidechaining to this particular track, and I have these particular settings. So when I copy this down on the same channel, you could see even the same channel, it loses all that sidechain information. It kept all the other parameters as it was, and it even kept the activated sidechain button activated, but it doesn't keep the sidechain information. If it in fact kept that sidechain input information, it would save me quite a bit of time in my project setups and during mixing and stuff. Now, it is true that when I move this plugin on the same track, it keeps the sidechain input settings, and when I move this to a completely different track, it keeps the settings but not the sidechain input. So again, just the consistency here is not quite accurate in my mind. If it just always kept the sidechain input, regardless of whether you're copy pasting or moving the plugin, then that would be fantastic. Number 12 is the ability for the MixConsole Snapshots to include track automation. So it is currently the case that when you create a MixConsole snapshot and you actually load it, Cubase will even prompt you that recalling that MixConsole snapshot will delete any insert automation. So any automation with the insert plugins that you've had is going to be deleted. It is rather unfortunate. If Steinberg was able to code Cubase in such a way to not have to always worry about this, that would just make the snapshot feature that much more powerful, and I would probably use it more often. Number 13 is another one of those consistency things, and that is having Bezier curves in the MIDI editor. So in a previous version, Steinberg introduced Bezier curves in the automation lanes, but it does not include Bezier curves in the MIDI editor. So if I go to, for instance, the pitch bend on here, and I draw stuff, it is still very clunky and very quantized looking. It's a very low resolution. So not only is it true for the lower lanes here for all these parameters, but it's also true for the MIDI expression notes. So when I draw in things, it's very, very quantized, very low resolution with no Bezier curves. So if they can put that in here, it would just make editing so much easier. There is, of course, the line tool. You can go with the parabola and different things. So it's not like you can't already do something, but this is kind of just a workaround because it's creating a bunch of points. So instead of then being able to easily and quickly readjust the actual curve of this by clicking one little button and changing and dragging it like this, I have to completely redo that curve. And it's just not as good for workflow reasons. Number 14 is not something that I think is required, but it could be a nice little safety net, and that is plugin sandboxing. And what I mean by that is if Cubase loads plugins in a sandbox little environment, if any one such plugin was to cause any errors or issues or problems, it wouldn't crash the entire project. It would just crash that particular instance of the plugin. But to expand on that a little further, I would again point to Bitwig. And what they've done is you can have the plugins sandboxed in many different ways. So you can have no sandboxing at all. So it's completely within the audio engine. It's not self-contained in its sandbox. It's just like what we have currently in Cubase. Everything is loaded within the audio engine. You then have the ability to load all the plugins separately from the audio engine, so it's sandboxed in its own environment. You also have the ability to sandbox the plugins based off of the manufacturer. So you can get more and more granular with how the sandboxing occurs. I could, for instance, sandbox Waves plugins separately from Soundtoys plugins. You then also have the ability to go on a by plugin basis, which means each individual plugin type has its own sandbox. So if I was to put the API 560 EQ plugin on multiple tracks, all those instances will be in the same sandbox, but it would be different from any other plugin, even if it's from Waves. And then we can go at the most granular, which is completely individually. So even if I had multiple instances of the API 560 on different tracks, each plugin is separately sandboxed from every other plugin. To me, this is a very good implementation of plugin sandboxing. It gives the user complete control of how it is sandboxed. And last but certainly not least, number 15, it's the ability to search in many different menu windows. So this is currently available in several different very important windows like insert plugins. You have a search function for all the presets. You have search in the VST rack instruments, in the media bay, in many, many different areas. But it is not currently available in the Preferences tab. And this is very unfortunate because if you do not know the very particular hierarchy and place in which Steinberg has put a particular function or particular optional feature, then it can be very, very time consuming to find something that you're looking for. If there is a global search function in this preference window alone, never mind other things, I probably would have saved hours and hours of my life as opposed to having to go and find and memorize where all these particular functions are. So the preferences window is a huge one. The next second huge one that I would suggest is with this section here. So I have some CMC Steinberg controllers, and they all have their own very dedicated buttons, like the play button, the stop button. But then you also have these extra buttons that you can yourself go in and configure. So on the transport, I get 4 additional things I can configure. On the channel controller, I have 8. But have a look at this. If I want to have a button activate and deactivate the metronome, if this was not already pre-set up, I can't just go into the command and click and find it. I'm clicking right now, there's no drop-down menu. I have to know what overarching category that the activate metronome is in. So I have to find in this entire list of categories where that may be. And I can't just go and search for metronome. It's not going to find it in there. It's leading me to the control room and also to the macro, which clearly is not where I'm needing to find. I have to know that it's in the transport area. And then within the transport, if there's multiple things, only there can I actually search for metronome. And then, okay, here we go. That's where the metronome is. Again, for me, I would have saved hours of my time setting this stuff up, because every time I've reinstalled Cubase, I've had to go in and redo the settings as per what I've assigned in the past for shortcuts. And finally, I just gave up. At some point, I just no longer used those extra function buttons because it was so time consuming to go in and figure out how I had it set up to begin with. And even once I figured out how I had it, it took that much more time to actually set up in this menu. So instead, they should have a search function so that I could go in here and just search and find it, and it'll find the category for me. Okay, so that is my 15 suggestions. So I hope you found that insightful in some way, and I certainly want to hear what new features or modifications that you think that Cubase Pro 11 should have. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Leave a like if you've enjoyed this video. So thank you for watching, take care, and bye-bye.